I was never the brightest student in school. In fact, for most of my academic life, I occupied what many considered the last bench, both literally and metaphorically. The last bench in my classroom was where all the so-called troublemakers and underachievers sat. While teachers believed it was a place of distractions and wasted potential, to me it was home. It was where I belonged, or so I thought. It all began in 7th grade at St. Martin's High School. I had just moved to a new city with my parents. My father had been transferred for work, and we had to pack up our lives and start fresh in a place that didn't know my name. On my first day at the new school, I sat on the last bench, mostly out of shyness and a desire not to be noticed. Little did I know that one simple decision would shape the course of my school life. I made a friend that day, Vicky, a lanky boy with spiky hair, mischief in his eyes, and an unmatched talent for mimicking teachers. We hit it off instantly. He, too, was a last bencher, not by choice, but by reputation. The teachers had already branded him as the kid who never studies. And I, a newcomer, was quickly lumped into the same category just by sitting beside him. For the next 2 years, Vicky and I lived the last bench life to its fullest. We played pen fights during lectures, passed silly notes, and snuck in snacks. But something deep inside me remained restless. I knew I wasn't dumb. I had dreams, vivid ones, of writing stories, of standing in front of a class and teaching, of being someone worth remembering. Yet every time I tried to study, my mind wandered. The label of underachiever hung around my neck like a heavy chain, tightening every time I got a low grade or a disapproving glance from a teacher. Things began to change in the 9th grade. One day, our English teacher, Mrs. Thomas, gave us a creative writing assignment. "Write a short story," she said, "about a moment that changed your life." That evening, I sat down at my desk, determined to do more than just scribble something random. Words poured out of me like they had been waiting all these years. I wrote about my grandfather, about how he taught me to look at the stars and dream. It was raw, honest, and full of emotion. When I submitted my story, I expected nothing, maybe even a poor grade. But 3 days later, Mrs. Thomas called my name in class. My heart raced. Was I in trouble? She held up my notebook and said, "This is one of the best stories I've read in a long time." Time froze. She continued, "Who knew someone from the last bench had such a powerful voice?" The class laughed softly. I smiled, but not because of the joke. I smiled because someone had seen me, truly seen me. That moment was the beginning of something new. Encouraged by Mrs. Thomas, I started participating in essay contests and writing clubs. I read more, observed more, and slowly, my grades began to improve, not dramatically but enough to get noticed. Vicky didn't mind. He was happy for me, though he wasn't ready to change his path just yet. In 10th grade, Mrs. Thomas announced an inter-school writing competition. "I think you should enter," she told me. "You have something special." I wasn't so sure. The competition was tough, and schools from across the state were participating. But I said yes. I wrote a story titled The Paper Boat. Inspired by the countless monsoon afternoons I had spent watching raindrops form tiny rivers on the streets. It was simple, nostalgic, and deeply personal. On the day of the competition, I wore my only formal shirt and stood nervously among a sea of confident faces. When my name was announced as the winner, I was stunned. I looked around, half expecting someone to say it was a mistake. But it wasn't. That trophy was the first physical proof that I was more than the last bench. When I returned to school, something had changed. Teachers greeted me with pride. Some students, who had never spoken to me before, congratulated me. Vicky threw his arm around my shoulder and said, "I told you, man. You're not one of us anymore." But the last bench had been more than a place. It had been a mindset. And though I had outgrown it, it had also given me the time to discover who I really was. The final year of school was a blur of preparations, assignments, and goodbyes. At the farewell ceremony, each student received a small note from one teacher. Mine was from Mrs. Thomas. It read, "Never forget that your voice is a gift. Keep writing. Keep teaching. The world needs both." I kept that note. I still have it, slightly yellowed with age but still powerful. After school, I went on to study English literature. I joined a small college where I continued to write. I even published a few articles in local magazines. Later, I became an English teacher, just like Mrs. Thomas. I wanted to be that person for someone else, the one who saw beyond grades, who looked past labels, and who believed in the power of encouragement. Now, as I stand in front of my own classroom, I sometimes glance at the last bench. It's always occupied by the dreamers, the shy ones, the misunderstood, and I make it a point to walk over, smile, and ask them questions. Sometimes I sit with them during breaks, listen to their stories, and tell them mine. I want them to know that the last bench isn't the end. It's just the beginning of a different kind of journey. I still write. My students read my stories. And occasionally one of them says, "Sir, I want to write like you." And I smile, remembering the boy who once hid behind the last bench, hoping no one would notice him. Life has a funny way of turning things around. All it takes is one teacher, one chance, one story, and the courage to believe that you are more than the place you sit in.